Get that trash cart out of here. You're ruining the view. The words sliced through the air like glass. Heads turned, eyes narrowed. A blonde woman in a silver gown and fur wrap pointed with her manicured finger toward the janitor near the edge of the auction floor. Seriously, she scoffed. Who lets the help parade through the front lobby during a private showing? The man she spoke of, a tall black janitor in a worn uniform, said nothing. He kept mopping, his motions smooth and silent, but his hands gripped the mop tighter. Laughter trickled from nearby. Maybe he's here to buy a Picasso, someone muttered. The janitor didn't flinch. His gaze stayed low, feet steady. His silence was a wall. A security guard approached, bending slightly as if ashamed but firm in tone. Sir, this is a VIP space. Please move your cart to the back service hallway. He nodded once, eyes still lowered, and slowly turned his cart away from the shimmering chandeliers and million-dollar chatter. Behind him, whispers bloomed. God, the bleach smell is overwhelming. Do they even screen these people? He paused at the marble column where the hallway met the grand room. His shoulders rose, then settled. They hadn't broken him. They'd reminded him. His eyes lifted once, not toward them, but to the velvet-draped canvas being positioned at center stage. For the first time that night, something flickered behind his still expression. And no one saw it. Not yet. But they would. Just beyond the velvet rope, a man with slick-back hair and a clipboard barked orders. Move the calder to the left. This one gets center. Carl Vollen's piece is the evening's crown. The janitor's brow twitched. The name hit him like a nail through glass. He knew that painting, not from galleries. From memory, from pain, from the way his fingers used to ache at 3 a.m. As he painted by candlelight in a one-room flat. He gripped the mop tighter. They'd renamed it Wanchori. They'd erased him. But the brushstrokes were his. The red wash in the bottom right, that was an accident. His accident. And no forgery could replicate it. Not the color, not the rage behind it, and especially not the truth it carried. They didn't just steal a painting, they stole his name. They thought no one would care. But some truths refused to stay buried. If this story moves you, subscribe to Unveiled Wealth and help us keep telling what others choose to hide. The hallway leading into the grand gallery glistened under soft amber lighting. Guests shimmered in silk and gold, their conversations bouncing off marble. And near the glass entrance, the janitor bent down to polish a smudge off the bottom pane. Hey, don't smear the display. The voice came sharp, from a security guard in a blazer 2 sizes too tight. The janitor looked up, startled. Before he could respond, the man strode over, waving his hand dismissively. Step back. Don't touch the glass. VIPs are arriving. This area needs to look pristine. The janitor nodded and rose, brushing his knees. He reached for his cart, but the guard was already behind him, nudging him with his forearm. Service access is through the rear. You're not supposed to be here now. Go. The janitor didn't argue. He simply turned the cart and moved silently down the hall. But as he passed the towering sculptures and framed programs, his eyes stayed fixed on one spot, a corner wall still covered in red velvet. He knew what was behind it. Behind him, the guard muttered, "What's with these people today? They think they belong here." The janitor didn't react. But inside, something shifted. That wall, he had touched every inch of the canvas behind it. And now, he wasn't allowed near it. The irony scraped deeper than any insult. He wasn't cleaning for them. He was walking the gallery of his own work, hidden under a name that wasn't his, and they were too blind to see it. He turned into the corridor where staff lockers lined the walls. But instead of entering, he paused by the side alcove. It faced a narrow slit of glass overlooking the gallery. From here, he could still see the velvet-covered canvas, still hear the faint echoes of the auctioneer's soundcheck. He stood there, mop in hand, still and unreadable. But inside, memories stirred. That guard's shove hadn't bruised him, it had unlocked him. He wasn't just shut out. He was erased, and he wouldn't stay that way. He returned to the side of the gallery, resuming his routine, mop gliding silently over tile. But the moment he stepped near the back of the crowd, a burst of laughter erupted. He looked up instinctively. A small group of guests had noticed him young, dressed sharp, holding flutes of champagne like trophies. One of them nudged the other and gestured toward him. Look, the help thinks he's part of the exhibit. The others chuckled. Another leaned in, louder now, clearly not caring if he was overheard. Maybe he's here to appraise the art. That mop's got real taste. More laughter. Sonadowan, Kone. The janitor didn't move, didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes shifted. He turned slowly, resuming his cleaning. Not because he had to, because it gave him cover to observe. The group continued joking, even mimicking his stance. One mockingly grabbed a nearby stand, pretending to mop. How much for this one, he called to no one, mimicking an auctioneer. Looks like it's got deep trauma built in authentic janitor strokes. The others burst into another round of laughter. The janitor's hands never left the handle. He kept moving, measured, controlled. Inside, the fire was spreading. Their voices echoed in the space, carelessly loud, assuming he had no ears, no history, no right to presence. The irony stung. They stood inches from a canvas born of his agony and laughed in the face of the hands that had made it. But they didn't know that. They couldn't know. Not yet. But they would. Every word they threw was being filed, recorded in silence. He wouldn't raise his voice. He wouldn't throw a punch. His revenge wouldn't come in shouts. It would come in numbers, in ink, in a single gesture they would never forget. He rounded the far corner of the gallery floor, pushing the mop bucket with practiced ease, letting the rhythm of his steps match the lull of conversations. All around him, the rich marinated in their comfort champagne flutes refilled without asking. Nods of approval passed over frames they barely understood, but his attention narrowed to a single draped piece at the heart of the room. The velvet hung heavy, a theatrical veil over what they called the crown of the evening. He knew better. That wasn't mystery behind the curtain, it was memory. And it belonged to him. He drifted closer, letting the crowd swell forward for the next announcement. As bodies parted, the frame's corner came into view. The brass shined under light, newly polished, sterile. He reached not out of impulse, but instinct fingers, brushing the underside. Almost reverent. That's when the reprimand landed. Sir, step back, please. That's a featured piece. A young woman in gallery black, clipboard in hand, clipped her steps toward him. Her voice was trained polite to guests, dismissive to staff. He complied with a nod, but even as he stepped back, his eyes didn't waver. Moments later, an older staff member stormed over, sensing disruption. Don't touch the exhibit, she snapped, tone louder, curt. This isn't a janitorial bay. Stay in designated service zones. Her gaze swept his name tag, unreadable. Her expression wasn't shock, it was protocol. Another uniform stepping out of frame. He withdrew his hand, but not his presence, because what they guarded so carefully wasn't theirs. That frame, that canvas, it had lived in his apartment, leaned against walls that leaked in rain. It had heard his coughing fits, soaked in the warmth of his only heater, a single bulb swinging in a ceiling socket. Now they wrapped it in cloth and reverence, claimed it as exclusive, yet wouldn't let him stand near it. Not because it was fragile, because they believed he wasn't worthy. And still, none of them saw the irony. The man forbidden from touching what he created, the ghost denied entry to his own past. That wouldn't last. The unveiling began with a hush. The crowd pressed forward. The lights dimmed slightly, and the velvet was drawn back. Gas followed. Flashbulbs. The canvas, bold and chaotic, filled the room like thunder. Blood reds, ash grays, jagged strokes that clawed against each other. A woman in emerald whispered, "My God, it's haunting." The janitor stood far behind them, nearly hidden by a column. But he didn't need to see. He remembered every inch. The balance of shadow, the imperfection in the bottom left corner, a smudge he once cursed, now praised as intentional depth. The silence among the crowd spoke louder than any commentary. For a moment, they weren't just looking at paint. They were absorbing a wound. A man with square glasses and a wine-stained smile stepped forward. Carl Wallen's finest yet. You can feel the artist's torment in every stroke. A younger woman nearby added, so raw. It almost feels personal. Durs. It was born of his lowest winter, of hunger and rejection and betrayal, of 3 nights without sleep, trying to finish something before eviction. And now they dissected it like historians while he, the maker, stood in silence, erased from the story. He heard them describe the piece as a statement on postmodern alienation. A critic called it a scream on canvas. But it wasn't theory. It wasn't aesthetic. It was his life. And they had bought it. Not the painting, the illusion. The myth of Wallen, a persona created to make them feel smarter, deeper, cultured. They applauded the pain but ignored the person. Then came the real blow. A curator whispered into a guest's ear. This piece was discovered at a small estate sale. Anonymous, unsigned. We knew it had potential. So we gave it a name. Gave it a name. He closed his eyes. For them, it was curation. For him, it was theft. They didn't just take his work. They took his identity, scrubbed his signature, and renamed his survival. Tonight, they celebrated that theft dressed in velvet and sipping wine. But the room wouldn't stay theirs for long. He didn't move when the applause began. When the bids started flying and voices rose with numbers, he stayed rooted, eyes fixed on the frame that once leaned against a wall in his crumbling apartment. One bid came in sharp, a woman in black, loud and decisive. 250. Another answered immediately, raising to 3. Gasps followed, but not from him. His breath remained steady. This wasn't a shock. This was a pattern. Then, in the lull between calls, his hand slipped into his pocket. He didn't pull anything out. He only touched it. His small black card, matte finish. Titanium-etched numbers. No logo, no name. But behind that card were years of work. No one saw late shifts, second jobs, freelance sketches sold under ghost signatures, silent deals. Every cent stacked in the shadows. And now, in the curve of his palm, the weight of that silence rested. He didn't grip it for power. He gripped it because it reminded him he still existed. A paddle rose in the distance. 325. Another responded. 350. The janitor's eyes narrowed. Still no recognition. Not even a glance his way. Not from the auctioneer. Not from the gallery heads. Not from the crowd praising his soul through someone else's name. He stepped slightly forward. Still behind the line. Still invisible. But emotion nonetheless. Then softly, under his breath, he said 4 words no one heard. They don't see me. And that was fine. They didn't have to see him. The velvet curtain behind the podium swayed ever so slightly, though no wind had passed. The auctioneer's gavel hovered midair. 375 on. Do I hear 4 murmurs rolled through the room like soft thunder? The janitor moved closer. 1 row in. His steps quiet, deliberate. No one noticed. Or so they thought. Another paddle lifted. 400 non. A pause. Then applause. Someone clapped early. Others joined. He took 2 more steps. Now he stood near the back of the central aisle. A few guests turned their heads slightly. Not at him, at the noise. At the rising numbers. The auctioneer nodded, smiling. A rare moment. Friends. Valen's piece may break the night's record. The janitor's right hand hovered over his chest. He didn't reach into his pocket. He just pressed his palm flat like steadying a drumbeat only he could hear. Across the room, a woman in white raised her paddle. 420. Her bracelet clinked as she moved. He stepped forward again. 1 foot past the shadow line cast by the gallery's chandelier. A man near the front whispered something to the gallery director. They both glanced back, not directly. But toward the aisle, someone was there. The janitor kept moving. 3 more steps. Now he stood beside the 4th row. His uniform caught the light. Not bright, but visible. No one spoke. But the auctioneer blinked for half a second. Their eyes locked. The janitor didn't raise his hand or say a word. Yet something in that look stalled the room. The gavel froze in midair. Breath suspended across the hall as he shifted his stance, and the velvet curtain behind the stage fluttered again, like a memory trying to surface. He was born in a town no one put on maps. A river town with more rust than roofs, where freight trains rattled windows and the night smelled of wet earth and gasoline. His first drawings were in dirt, traced with a stick, erased by the wind. Paper came later, pages torn from old ledgers, wrappers from flour sacks, anything that would hold a line. His mother worked 2 jobs. His father wasn't around long enough to remember, but there was always a pencil stub, always something to draw. The bulb swung faintly from a frayed wire. The room smelled of damp cloth and turpentine. He sat on the floor, knees tucked, a flattened rice sack spread before him. Lines scrawled in charcoal danced under candlelight. The sack crinkled as he shaded, the texture rough, unyielding. But he didn't stop. Not when the candle hissed low. Not when the wind slipped through the broken frame. He'd drawn that same face 4 times, once calm, once broken, once angry, once blank. He had no name for it. It just kept returning to him. On the wall behind him, Newspaper clippings curled at the edges. A single phrase circled in pen, open submission, emerging voices in American art. He read it again, tracing each letter as if memorizing permission. In the corner, a shoebox stacked with sketches bulged under its own weight. He opened it, lifted a drawing with the corner singed. The fire hadn't taken much, but the scar remained. Like the rest of him. Later that year, he stood in line outside a gallery, the kind with frosted glass and names etched in steel. He wore his best shirt. No collar. Stains faded but not gone. When his turn came, he unfolded 3 pieces. The assistant didn't even look up. "We'll call if there's interest," she said. Behind her, a row of pristine canvases shimmered under halogen. None looked like his. He waited 3 weeks. Nothing. Then one day, walking past that same gallery, he saw a new show announced. New edge breaking the frame. He paused. Through the window, a painting hung all motion in red and fracture. It looked like his. Not copied. Not similar. His, sir. But the name wasn't. It read Carl Wallen. He didn't confront them. Not then. He didn't yell or demand. He just stood outside, staring through the glass as strangers admired what had once lived on his floor. He watched a man in loafers explain the brushwork to a woman in pearls. She nodded, thoughtful, sipping from a stemless glass. And there it was, a small plaque beneath the frame. Carl Wallen. Numerous sermons for sie, Iprin, medium mixed, origin unknown. He turned and walked away. It wasn't just the theft. It was the certainty, the way they renamed him without hesitation, the way the gallery claimed discovery, as if he'd been buried treasure and they'd unearthed him, rather than erasing his name from the canvas. After that, he stopped submitting, not because he stopped painting, but because there was no point. If his work was good, it would be taken. If it wasn't, it would be ignored. Either way, he vanished. Years passed. The name Carl Wallen appeared again, first in a magazine, then at a museum show in Chicago. Critics hailed the mystery, the anonymity, the rawness. They said the artist must have suffered, must have bled for the work. He had it diary. He had just not the man they credited. He kept painting, nights, weekends for us, behind kitchens, in borrowed garages. He kept every piece, unsigned, rolled and stored. Some he gave away anonymously. Some he sold for rent, never enough. But he watched, tracked auctions, noted the rise. And when one of his early pieces, the one with the burned edge, the one he never meant to sell, appeared in a catalog, labeled as Wallen's Lost Era, he knew this wouldn't be about revenge. It would be about truth. Unspoken, unmistakable. And it would happen here. The lights in the auction hall dimmed strategically, leaving a circle of brilliance around the stage, casting long, reverent shadows along the aisle. Crystal glinted, heels clicked, and for a moment the room held its breath as if entering sacred space. Behind one of the marble columns, the janitor watched, the velvet edge of his uniform catching just enough of the spill light to outline his shoulder. The overhead spotlights reframed themselves, narrowing on the central pedestal. A hush moved like smoke through the room as the auctioneer lifted the microphone. Next, the evening's crown, a rare early piece by Carl Wallen. Anonymous in origin, immortal in presence. Cameras turned, glasses tilted. The janitor didn't move. His hand rested calmly on the mop handle, but his eyes were fixed, unblinking. The stage assistant removed the final veil with a practiced motion. Gasps, applause, Ishwar. The room leaned forward. The auctioneer continued. Opening bid, 200,000. From behind the column, the janitor's foot shifted. A woman to his left lifted her paddle. 220. He stepped forward once, still unseen. A second bid followed. 250. Then, through the velvet hush of anticipation, the gallery director's voice rang out, smooth and pride-laced. This piece marks a turning point in Wallen's silent rebellion, textured pain, defiant abstraction. He didn't name the brushstroke. He didn't know the hand that made it, but he sold the myth like a sermon. The janitor moved into the light. A quiet shift rippled through the front row. No one turned fully, but glances darted a pause between sips of champagne, a twitch in the hand holding the paddle. He didn't walk fast. He didn't need to. Each step carried weight built from years no one in this room had lived. The velvet rope near the aisle grazed his hip. The spotlights, timed and choreographed to frame only art, now caught him in a half wash. He paused beside the fifth row, eyes forward. The auctioneer blinked once, twice. A murmur passed to a technician. The camera angle adjusted. Still, no words. Just movement. Then his hand slipped into his pocket. He didn't fumble. He drew the card clean, matte black, heavy. He placed it on the bidding stand, gently, like it mattered. The scanner read it. The screen blinked. $500,000 confirmed. A breath caught somewhere in the third row. A champagne glass trembled. The gallery director froze mid-sentence. The janitor didn't speak. He didn't have to. Silence cracked. Then, like thunder rolling behind mountains, voices rose. Did he just is that? The auctioneer cleared his throat, but no words followed. The gallery director stepped forward, eyes locked on the card reader, still glowing green. The janitor didn't move. He didn't need to. The number said everything. 500,000 from a man holding a mop. The room didn't know what to do with that. A paddle lifted hesitant. 520. Someone tried. Voice uncertain. Another responded quickly, louder. 550. Bidding resumed, desperate to reclaim normalcy. The janitor said nothing. He lifted the card again, tapped once more. The screen blinked $600,000. Now the murmurs had texture confusion, panic, calculation. The director whispered to the auctioneer. A woman near the front raised her paddle. 620. Her bracelet clinked again. The janitor responded without hesitation. $700,000. He didn't glance at the stage. He didn't look at the canvas. His eyes were only on the auctioneer and the crowd that once told him to move aside. The bidding faltered. Some hesitated. Some withdrew. It wasn't just the number, it was the presence. His presence, in the light one, in control. The auctioneer steadied himself. We have 700. Do I hear he was cut off by the screen? 800. The room gasped. People turned. Faces tried to make sense of it. That face, Winnermonas, Soridur, that uniform, that silence. There's a sick, Then a man stood, a private collector from Berlin, known for his ego as much as his acquisitions. 850. His voice dared the janitor to fold. The janitor didn't flinch. He placed the card again. $1,000, $7. Now there was no sound. Even the air paused. He had their full attention. At last, someone dropped their bidding paddle. It clattered against the marble floor with a hollow crack. A pair of reporters near the media row scrambled to refocus their lenses. One whispered, "Get a name, now, mirror the room." The auctioneer adjusted his stance, trying to maintain poise, but his next words stuck behind his teeth. Across the room, a gallerist in navy slowly rose, nodding toward the tech booth. "That card," he said to the auctioneer, voice measured, "is registered to a private fund black tier, non-corporate. Titanium class, verified." The murmur turned to buzz. The janitor didn't react. He simply stepped to the side, closer to the stage, closer to the canvas. His eyes never left it. Not the crowd, not the stairs, only the art. A beat passed. Then, as if timing belonged to him alone, he reached up, grasped the bottom of the frame, and tilted the canvas forward. The gallery lights caught the lower right edge. The room froze. There, scratched beneath the final layer of fixative, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look, was a signature. Not printed, not added, etched. His name. Gasps spread like fire on dry grass as phones rose and camera shutters clicked in frantic rhythm. The etched name now glowing on the overhead screen. For a moment, no one breathed. The gallery director's voice cracked through the silence. "That's signature. That's not possible." But no answer came, only a rising wave of whispers. The janitor stepped back from the canvas without a word, letting the truth hang heavy in the light. A woman near the VIP lounge clutched her pearls and murmured, "He painted it." Another scanned the catalog with trembling hands. Then a sharper voice cut through the murmur. "He's the real artist." The words detonated the room. Guests surged forward, colliding with disbelief, voices clashing with confusion. Was this a setup? Who's Carl Vollen then? I paid 6 figures for a fake. The gallery staff froze, their composure shattered. One collector dropped his glass. The critic at the end row ripped out a page from his notebook. The director raised his hands in futile protest, stammering about verification, oversight, misunderstanding, but no one heard him. The janitor stood firm, unmoved by the panic, untouched by the unraveling performance. The silence around him now echoed louder than any accusation. He didn't need to defend the truth. He only needed to be seen. And now, no one could look away. Reporters in the back scrambled to set up live streams. A blogger began narrating in real time. "This is history," she whispered. "A janitor just revealed he's the true artist behind Carl Vollen." On screen, the camera zoomed tighter on the signature. Someone tried to block it with their hand. Too late. The image was already online. Truntamin, ending, headlines forming. The myth was cracking. The crowd that once laughed now leaned forward, desperate to claim they'd known, that they'd seen something. But they hadn't, and they couldn't deny it anymore. He never raised his voice. But the room belonged to him now. The gallery director opened his mouth again, but found no air behind the words. Only a dry breath swallowed in panic as the crowd began closing in with their phones, with their questions, with their disbelief. He turned to the auctioneer, expecting rescue, but the man had already stepped behind the podium, shrinking from the moment like the myth unraveling in front of them. The authority in the room no longer belonged to names etched on plaques or badges pinned to lapels. It belonged to silence, to stillness, to the man who stood in a janitor's uniform with his name now burning from the bottom corner of the canvas. One reporter raised a phone, then lowered it, then raised it again. "Can we get a statement?" she asked, her voice thin, almost polite. The janitor glanced at her but said nothing. The reporter hesitated, then hit record anyway. A blogger nearby was already whispering into her mic. "The room is frozen. The man with the mop is the artist." He said nothing, but somehow it's louder than any press release. A guest near the gallery wall muttered, "That's the guy they told to move." A woman in red nodded slowly, not taking her eyes off the stage. "And now he owns it." Screens across the room lit up with notifications. Headlines formed. One read "Unknown no more." Another "The artist who watched from the shadows." The curators in the back began arguing in hushed tones. One reached for his phone, dialing someone, anyone, but the signal stuttered, swallowed by the press of people documenting everything. From the corner, a security supervisor asked quietly, "Do we clear the space?" No one answered. No one dared, because the man in the center hadn't moved, and neither had the truth. And in a room full of wealth, image, and deception, it was the only thing still standing. The curtain that once framed illusion now fluttered in retreat, a mere scrap of fabric between what was crafted and what was claimed. And in its place stood not a performance, not a symbol, but a man whose silence had shattered every gallery wall they built to keep him out. A woman near the back finally spoke, almost to herself. He didn't need a microphone. And beside her, a young artist clutched his sketchbook tighter, eyes wide as if seeing art for the first time. The gallery's founder, watching from the mezzanine, sank slowly into a chair, his hand gripping the railing like it might pull him back into control. But the room had long slipped beyond his reach. In the far corner, a critic deleted a scheduled post, his headline already irrelevant. Outside the hall, a crowd was forming, people drawn by the buzz, by the push alerts, by the story too strange not to be true. Inside, cameras panned, adjusted, froze. The signature on the canvas, his name remained in focus. No one spoke now, not because there was nothing to say, but because everything had already been said, wordless. In the moment he stepped forward, the slow clap started, not mocking, not forced, just one, then another, then more. The sound filled the hall like rain beginning to fall on stone. The janitor didn't bow, didn't wave. He turned from the canvas, his work done, and walked back down the aisle the same path they once told him to clear. This time, they stepped aside, and none would ever forget that he had passed through. Somewhere, a single headline refreshed the janitor who signed the truth. But this was only the beginning. Stay with Unveiled Wealth, and if this story moved you, subscribe. More truths are waiting to step out of the shadows. The press lights hit fast. Questions flew harder. Reporters pushed microphones toward the gallery steps where the director stood, pale and blinking, each flash slicing deeper than the last. He raised a hand, voice caught between contrition and collapse. We acknowledge a grave mistake," he said. "We apologize not just to the artist, but to every voice we dismissed because we couldn't see past the frame." Behind him, assistants fumbled with statements, but the damage was done. One of the curators, the same who had once told the janitor to step away from the artwork, stood frozen near the back wall. His phone trembled in his hand, A live stream he'd started for influencer clout was still rolling until it wasn't. With a flick, the screen went black. The silence after was louder than any broadcast. A journalist called out, "Will the artist speak?" No reply. The janitor was gone. Not fled, just not there. He didn't need to be, because now the world was speaking for him. Outside, a camera crew filmed reactions. A young woman clutched her press badge and shook her head. I watched him walk through that crowd. They couldn't stop staring. They didn't clap because it was art. They clapped because it was truth. In the media tent, headlines shifted in real time. Forgery scandal at Luke's auction. Unknown name unveils masterpiece. And beneath every story, a photo, the back of a janitor walking away from applause. He hadn't just broken into the art world. He'd redrawn its lines. Inside the gallery, staff scrambled to rearrange the exhibit. The nameplate beneath the canvas was gone. In its place, a new one gleamed, the janitor's real name, etched in brushed steel. A small card beside it read, "This piece was misattributed. The truth has been restored." Outside, the crowd had doubled. People stood on tiptoe. Some brought sketch pads. Others just stood, silent, as if bearing witness to a moment that needed no narration. One girl held a handmade sign, "Art is truth. Truth is him." Back in the building, the director wiped sweat from his brow as another reporter approached. "Will the gallery rebrand?" she asked. He paused, then nodded. "We'll begin by listening." Another journalist added, "What will you call this exhibit now?" The director looked toward the canvas. The janitor's signature glinted under the lights. He exhaled. "Unveiled. We what has been done." A moment later, the doors opened again. A school group entered, children shuffling in behind their teacher, unaware they were walking into history. One boy stopped in front of the painting. "Why is everyone talking about this one?" The teacher knelt beside him. "Because for once, the story behind the art is louder than the price on it." No one needed to explain further. Not that day. The gallery's walls no longer just held paintings. They held proof. Weeks passed. The gallery changed. Not just its lighting or layout, but its breath. Visitors no longer whispered for effect. They stood in silence that meant something. The painting, once hidden behind myth, now hung center stage. The janitor's name beneath it no longer contested but celebrated. Tour guides paused longer at that frame, their voices steadier, more reverent. Other pieces followed. His earlier works, once lost or sold anonymously, were tracked down, authenticated, and returned. A wall was dedicated to them, rough sketches, unfinished canvases, even torn scraps, not because they were polished, but because they were his. Then came the announcement. A new exhibit. Open call. No entry fee. No resume required. Title: Working Hands. Submission rules were simple. Create from truth. Do not lie on the canvas. Artists came in waves. From mechanic garages, from hospital shifts, from kitchens, from corners of the country no gallery had ever touched. Their work was raw, basharenti, human. The same critics who once used silence as dismissal now found themselves without words for awe. A visitor stood in front of a new piece one afternoon, a drawing on cardboard, edges scorched, colors made from crushed berries. She didn't ask who made it. She only said, "This one feels like someone didn't give up." Behind her, a plaque explained by a dishwasher. Single mother, never trained. In a different time, it might have been ignored. Now it hung like fire, unchallenged. The ripple didn't stop at the gallery. Within months, the artist's story became part of classrooms, lectures, and news specials. A foundation was formed not in his name, but in the spirit of what he stood for: access. It began quietly. Small kits shipped to shelters, crates of brushes and chalk to underserved schools, free pop-up studios in bus stations and food banks. No speeches, no logos, just a space to create. Children lined up in cities and small towns alike, not because someone told them they could be artists, but because now they believed it. One morning, a boy in a rusted-out suburb unboxed a donated sketch pad. On the inside cover, a handwritten line, "Your truth matters. Keep drawing." No signature, but the handwriting matched the signature, now etched in the gallery's most guarded wall. In time, stories emerged from the program. A girl who drew her first comic under a highway bridge. A teenager who painted grief and sold her first canvas at a corner market. None of them famous. All of them seen. The man who once cleaned their floors never returned to the spotlight. But he watched. And every time a child lifted a pencil without asking permission, The silence he once carried broke a little more. Not with noise, with voices finally finding room. Not every truth kicks the door open. Some truths wait. They mop floors, blend into corners, wear names that aren't theirs until the silence around them becomes too loud to ignore. Some truths don't shout. I mean, they stare. And one day, they step forward, not to explain, but to reveal. You've seen it tonight, what happens when the overlooked are no longer silent, when the dismissed stop asking for a seat and start owning the room. What began as a whisper in a janitor's uniform ended in thunder the gallery will never forget. But outside that room, 100 more stories wait in kitchens, in shelters, in garages where sketchbooks are stained with oil and hope. They're not looking for fame, just space, just one moment when the world pauses, looks back, and says, I see you. That's why Unveiled Wealth exists, because not every story wears a suit. Not every hero holds a mic. Some carry a mop, a brush, a name no one bothered to learn until now. Stay until the end. The twist redefine what redemption truly means. If you witnessed injustice like this, what would you do? Comment below. Subscribe to Unveiled Wealth, where kindness sparks redemption and silence breaks power.